Okay, I've got one more handout if anybody needs one. Oh, that's cute. I don't think so. I think everybody's got one. We got just the right amount. Okay, so I think we're gonna. Yeah. I think
I'll welcome everybody.
Okay.
I'll hand it over to you.
Get over there.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for being here for our third talk in our Generations Speakers series, We had to reschedule this one, and I know that some of you who were planning to come before have made it tonight, and I'm really glad that you're here. This is a very special series where we bring together Holocaust survivors and their relatives so that we can hear their family stories, and we've really been looking forward to this one. So I'm Lauren Bairnsfather. I'm the director of the Holocaust Center. Thank you for coming. I hope you had a chance to look around at some of the things that we have here. We're always happy to see new faces, and I see a lot of them tonight, and some people that we know well. So I'm going to introduce first Paul Guggenheimer, who is a great friend of the Holocaust Center, his father, Dr. James Guggenheimer, and I'm just going to hand it over and let them take it from here. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Lauren, and good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. It's great to see so many faces. Some I know, some I don't know. So all of you curious to hear the story we're going to tell tonight. I'll take this moment, use this opportunity to ask you all to put your cell phones on stun so that nobody is harmed in the process of telling this story. Welcome to tonight's installment of the Generations Speaker Series. The period, oh, by the way, I'm Paul Guggenheimer, and that's my dad, Dr. James Guggenheimer, over there. And he's here tonight to tell an interesting story from an interesting period in American history, the period of the mid to late 30s and early 40s, an ironic one in American immigration history. There was at the time a reluctance on the part of the United States government and the citizens of this country to allow refugees and Holocaust survivors into the United States. But as history shows, the ones who made it to America, who were allowed in, became an integral part of the identity of this country, of the American story, contributing mightily to its success. And one of those Holocaust survivors who made it to these shores is my father, Dr. James Guggenheimer, who arrived in New York in the late 30s, eventually graduated from Columbia University Dental School and made his way to Pittsburgh in 1966, taking a job at the University of Pittsburgh Dental School, where he has been a professor of dentistry for the last 52 years. Dad, why don't you go ahead and share your story?
Who's counting?
Who's counting? Well, even with my bad arithmetic, did you turn your mic on?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, even with my bad arithmetic, I count 52. Any math teachers here want to confirm that? And they, at the white coat ceremony, they presented him with a lovely gold clock a couple of years ago for the 50th anniversary. And, you know, hopefully we'll see the 60th. Dad, go ahead.
At the dental school, they call me Dr. G, so an abbreviation of my name. Keep it simple. Well, some of the students' names now are more complicated than Guggenheim. So Jim or James is fine. Besides, I mean, we're not at the dental school, and I know that because there's people sitting at the front row.
We can't hear you, Doc. We're having to hear you well.
Mic upgrade.
Why don't you try this one?
This is my-
Yeah, but
It has to be close to your mouth.
Okay,
Try
that's
that
fine.
one. Paul has, it's easier.
I think this might be better.
Yeah.
Jim, here. Everyone out there.
Cameo appearance for Lauren Barron's father. Here you go, Dad. You can just take that off.
I'll take it. There we go. Thank you.
Perfect.
Paul is blessed with a good speaking voice. I missed that particular gene.
That's why he became a professor.
I didn't know where to start this, so I figured, well, we'll start with the family tree.
Hold the mic close there.
We'll start with the family tree, and as I got into the family tree, I kept finding more and more sort of spaces and blanks that I had to, that just, it wasn't clear because most of the family history was passed down by my parents. There's no written document that really describes those years. So it's, I guess, anecdotal. So some of my recollections and also Paul's recollections, which are better at the time. So to begin, on the left side of the first page, the family tree is my mother's family. I don't even remember her parents' first names. They were from Riga, Latvia. That's where my mother was born. Edda, a brother, Mendel, and another brother whose name I've also not forgotten. The question mark brother, I think, is the only one who probably perished in the Holocaust. Mendel immigrated to Israel, to Palestine, along with his parents, and he married, and they have a son. Oh, we have not been in touch. On the other side, the Guggenheimer family, we have better recollections. Simon, the grandfather Simon, and his wife Regina. They had 3 children. There was a fourth who died in childhood. Anyway, they had 3 children. Martha, Bertha, and Siegfried. So that's when the bells started to ring. Why would they give him the name of Siegfried? Well, they were German citizens. They had no issues at the time. So the kid, my father and the children of Martha and Bertha all had German names.
Hang on a second, Dad. Sorry to interrupt you. The camera
We're
person.
still making
people-
sure the people who are out there can see you.
Okay.
So can you slide that way a little bit? Better? Sorry, everyone.
That's fine. So you've got your shot, and hopefully people can see you. My dad's a little under the weather, so he prefers to sit, unfortunately. So
Then
he's so handsome, he just can't.
I run out of gas even soon. So jumping ahead a step, so everybody got German names. They were born in Germany, and everything was peaceful, and everybody was happy. Of course, it was after World War I, but there were, again, as I said, no issues. So I'm going to skip over that. We'll try to jump back and forth. So, yeah, let's go to the first slide. All right, so that's my father on your left. My father was born in 1900, so at the end of the war, 1918, he was obviously 18 years old, and so he was never drafted. The other on your right is a picture of my grandfather. My grandfather was a physician and served in the medical corps in World War I for the German Army. served proudly, uniform, and I think that one of those other pictures we had, they were waiting to meet the Kaiser. The Kaiser was touring and this is at the Russian front, in front of a bunker. I never talked very much about those years, but I mean, again, World War I, and they survived. So now we can move ahead to, oh, I'm sorry. So my mother came from Riga, and she met my father in Germany. My father was studying chemistry. She was studying, I think, medicine and microbiology. And so they met at I forget the city where they met, but most of it takes place in southern Germany or Bavaria. So they met in Germany and married. My father was working in, on the last page, there's a map, the upper left-hand corner. So where he worked and where they initially lived was in Oberhausen, just in the Ruhr Valley. My father was an industrial chemist. And so this was, I guess, like Pittsburgh. It was engaged in coal mining, steel, and manufacturing. And he was a chemist developing rubber and other chemicals. Again, inorganic chemistry was his specialty, industrial chemistry. So anyway, that's where they met. And can't even tell you when they were married. What was their 50th? Anyway. So now we can go to the next caption underneath German timelines. Hitler was released from prison, replaced the party, and in 1933-34, they began, the Germans or the Nazi party began to boycott Jewish professionals and businesses. This was the first stage. And so my father lost his job. And I think they sensed that things were not going well, so they decided, why they decided, I don't know, but they decided to move to Yugoslavia. The other side of the family, the Rosenfelders and Stargarders, stayed in Germany, but then left sometime in the middle to late 30s. So they moved to Yugoslavia around when my father lost his job, which would have been 33, 34. And my parents started their own little cosmetic business in Belgrade, capital of Yugoslavia. All right, so I was born in 1936. And I said the other family gave their children German names. My parents, did, seeing the discrimination, did not want to give me a German name, did not want to give me a Serbian name, so they decided to give me a Hebrew name. And so that stuck with me through high school, and then I decided to.
What was the name, Dad?
It's right on the sheet, Yehuda. I used the middle initial Y for a while, and then I dropped out as well. So, and then things, of course, got bad in Yugoslavia, too. There was a great deal of political turmoil. I looked some of these things up. The fact that communists were the Serbs, communists, there were Nazis, the Croats, I think, had strong Nazi affiliation. So things didn't go well in Yugoslavia either. So they decided to emigrate in 38. And then we'll get to the next page. There were quotas for coming into the United States. Every country had a quota. Quotas were based on your country of birth. And so since the numbers were very limited, as we'll see, I got a Serbian visa, got it on the Serbian quota, my father had a German visa, German quota, and my mother got in on the Russian quota. So, but again, because the numbers were so limited that way, we didn't have any issues with running out of space under the quota system. But meanwhile, my grandparents are still in Germany. A small town, Neustadt an der Saale. You see that on the map in the last page. He was a practicing physician. And I guess we're not particularly, I guess they were left alone. Again, it was a small town. He was a physician. Perhaps he was respected. And so they managed to, I guess, avoid the deportations that had begun, the discrimination and the deportation. And so, but then in '39, the war started. Poland, Germany invaded Poland, England, France declared war on Germany, and then things got serious. So my grandparents, I guess, decided to come to the States, and apparently left by a sealed train, which is described underneath. This is all the background reading that I did. Being a quintessential academician and researcher, I just kept digging and digging, discovering more and more material. Anyway, so they left on a sealed train, and I do remember they came through Lisbon and then came to New York. Everyone came from either from Germany. My parents, I think, my parents sailed from France, and my grandparents sailed from Lisbon, then to New York, and we moved to the Bronx, and Simon and Regina found a place in a home for the aged. Can we go to the slide? Next one. Here they are in New York. And next slide. There's my grandfather. He was a staff physician at this home for the aged, and I guess in return for his services, they were not charged any fee to live there. And this was in Lower Manhattan. And they stayed there until their deaths.
I don't know if you can see that, but 1943 is the year.
Yeah, so at this point, they've been here for 2 years. My grandfather was Orthodox, grandmother was not. My father was so-so, my mother was certainly not Orthodox. And of course, growing up in the Bronx, there were no Reform or conservative congregations, they were all Orthodox. All right, so let's stay with the family tree for just another minute. Cousin Ernest was a school teacher in New York. His brother, Manfred, served in World War II in the military. Ernst, I think, got deferments. 18. So I think more than 20 years ago, Ernest decided to move back to Germany, to Munich, and married Marianne, who I met about 8 years ago, and had a daughter, Simone, who was named after grandfather Simon. So I kept Googling, and I Googled Munich, And there was a little notation that the Jewish population in Munich today is about the same as it was before the war. There's a very thriving Jewish community. And Simone went to Hebrew school and has now finished what is the equivalent, I guess, of high school. On the next page, this came from the Holocaust website, Holocaust Museum. And as Paul already indicated, there were very strict restrictions on immigration. And the bullet points essentially summarize what those obstacles were. The U.S. was still in a recession, and citizens were afraid that immigrants would take their jobs. Private organizations, however, helped with immigration. You had to provide your own financial assistance, and you had to have a sponsor. In order to get a visa, you had to have a sponsor. My mother, fortunately, had an uncle who lived in Philadelphia. They had immigrated to the States, I think, many years earlier. And so he served as our sponsor. But it wasn't long before my father found employment again in a chemical factory in New Jersey, where he commuted from the Bronx every day. Then it's just some of the obstacles. The problem with ships, the passenger shipping companies didn't want to take risks with their ships and the submarines. Then we have the quota issue. A poll in 1938, 72% of the population said we should not allow more Jewish exiles to come to the country. And then this was bizarre. After the Hitler-Stalin non-aggression pact, they were afraid that Jews from Russia and Germany were being sent here to act as spies. So they also had a new rule. And then the controls got tighter and tighter. And see some of the numbers, there were far more refugees trying to get into the States than the quotas would allow. But that doesn't necessarily because on the next page, it's from website, this is actually taken from immigration data and documents published by the US government. And as you can see, people wanting to leave European countries that were going to be taken over by Germany, or Germany of course annexed Austria first. People wanted to get out. Now this is not just the Jews, this is all the immigrants leaving their countries between 32 and 45. And if you do a graph, you would see it's a bell-shaped curve. That immigration out of these countries peaked in 39. That was about when the war started, and then the numbers fell drastically as the Germans took over and forbade the people to leave the country. But as I said before, the numbers coming from Germany and Austria do not coincide with the numbers from the Holocaust. So I don't know how we can explain that discrepancy, other than perhaps there were some extra spaces that were made available by consular officials. And in putting all of this together, I decided to go to Google Maps. And this is a blow-up of southern Germany, which opened up a whole bunch of other little areas for research. Again, on the upper left was the city of Oberhausen, the industrial center where my father worked, which is only 100 miles from there. his birthplace. Not far from Dresden, a little less than 100 miles. Dresden's history is of interest that as late as February 45, a huge bombing raid was turned loose on Dresden. There was a firestorm. And this continues to raise a number of ethical issues why the British and Americans would just bomb a site that had no particular strategic value, and with the understanding also that the war was coming to an end. But anyway, that's an aside. And then, interestingly, Bayreuth is the German pronunciation, is only 40 miles from Neustadt. And I was wondering if that had any influence on the choice of my father's name. I don't know when the Bayreuth Festival started, but we know the famous Wagner ring cycle. One of the operas is Siegfried, and Siegfried is the hero in the 5 Wagnerian operas that make up the cycle. So again, being proud Germans, they gave him a real German name right out of Wagnerian opera. Wagner also has a history of anti-Semitism. Also, one of his children, I think, one son or grandson, I think, is making efforts to make amends for the record. There was a record of anti-Semitism, both with Wagner and one of his children. And one of the children, I think, met with Hitler. And of course, Hitler loved the Wagnerian operas and supposedly played the last of the Ring cycle, the Goethe Dem Room, in the last days of the bunker. All right, beneath Neustadt, we have, we can go to let's go to Würzburg first, 24 miles from home, where my grandfather went to the university and got his medical degree in 1898. Above that is Schweinfurt, which I guess was a small city, but became a center for manufacture of ball bearings, and U.S. and British air attacks tried to destroy those, and as a consequence, the U.S. lost a huge number of planes in that one raid. And even more surprisingly is Nuremberg, which is only 46 miles from their home, where it all started. The Nuremberg laws, the discrimination laws began in 1935, and then ended with the Nuremberg trials of 1945 and 1946. So I think I've more or less tied it all together. And so I think we can get questions or comments.
All right, I'll ask some questions and then we'll open it up to the audience. But I do want to go through some of these photos. Again, this is my dad's father, my grandfather. That's Siegfried.
In his German uniform.
In his German uniform.
And of World War I.
And of course, that's our great-grandfather in your grandfather, Simon, in his World War I uniform. And then so well, first of all, one question I would have, Dad, is why Yugoslavia? You said you weren't sure, but I think I remember grandmother saying that in the Serbian areas, Jews were welcome.
It must have been initially, yes.
The Croats.
Croats were anti-Semitic and
but they were fairly, I think Yugoslavia was much more liberal initially. But even during the war, I think there was a lot of anti-fascism activity. There were they continued to fight the Germans.
So you were born in Belgrade, and there he is, folks. And I like the one in the middle where he has the man bun. Well, you were way ahead of your time with the hairstyle, Dad.
The one on the right, my mother always said I looked like Mussolini.
So that's 1930s. So you're about maybe 1 year old there, and on the right, 1937. There you are at 2, and lots of hair flipping. You still have a good head of hair, amazingly enough.
Yeah.
So and you spoke Serbian when you were
Yeah, I
born?
started learning Serbian. We spoke German at home, but I think the housekeeper spoke Serbian and didn't speak German, so I began to pick up Serbian.
And so grandfather, Siegfried, was a chemist, and he was making, when they came to Belgrade, when they came to Yugoslavia, they started a business where he developed a cosmetic cream.
Yeah, cosmetics, a cream.
Can you tell us about that?
No, it was called Limona, I think, and they used some lemon extract to formulate. It had a lemon aroma.
And my grandmother wrote the advertising copy, among other things, I guess helped market it, which fit her personality. She was very outgoing and talkative. My grandfather said next to nothing. He was a very, very quiet individual.
Oh, what was it supposed to,
Pardon me?
what was it supposed to do?
Oh, the cream? I guess it was good for the complexion.
It was a hand lotion, just like the zillion hand lotions we have today.
Apparently, they had enough to survive on. So apparently, the business was good until they had to leave. And so there we are in New York. You've seen that. That's 1943. Simon.
Okay, so let me go
Okay.
back.
Oh, okay.
Go back.
All right.
No, go ahead. Go forward. It's okay.
Well, yes, Mom. My mom wants to ask a question,
No, I beg your pardon.
even though we haven't opened the floor up, Mom. But go ahead.
Your mother said that they were not allowed underwear. And that they put the cosmetics in the baby carriage under you.
Yeah, Paul, I think, heard that same
They
story.
were not allowed to work where?
They technically were not allowed to work in Belgrade.
So they had to hide so they
They put them in the baby carriage.
in my dad's carriage.
Yeah.
So they had to peddle it clandestinely. Is that no kidding?
Paul? Can you repeat what the mom said?
I did. Oh, I'm sorry. She said, sorry. What my mother said was that apparently all Jews are just the Jewish immigrants. Okay, according to my grandmother, they were not allowed to work in Belgrade. They did anyway, so I guess they had like an underground cosmetics business. Even though I do remember my grandfather telling me that grandma wrote the advertising copy. So where they advertised, I don't know. But at any rate, in order to circumvent the authorities, they kept their product, they hid it in my father's baby carriage and peddled it around that way. So, underground cosmetic cream, black market cream, Somehow that didn't make it into the movie The Third Man, but anyway.
All right, so while we're here.
Thanks, Mom.
This is near the home in Lower Manhattan. Grandfather was, in those days he wore a hat and coat and tie. And as I said, they were Orthodox. So on Saturday, he would not turn the radio on. They would like to hear the Metropolitan Saturday broadcasts. They were already ongoing at the time. So they went to the local library where they had a radio and they broadcast the opera. So maybe they also heard Wagner and Siegfried. And unfortunately it's been lost, but I remember the New York Times had a photograph showing, I think maybe after Grandpa died, showing Grandma at the library listening to the Saturday opera, Metropolitan Opera. Okay, now let's go to the next one.
Okay, well, this is, that's,
Very briefly, Grandpa was born. So, That's another gene that skipped at the same
No,
time.
you inherited from the mother's side.
Well, I don't know who, but
Well,
also,
clearly the evidence would indicate that.
also my parents were fairly short and he was tall, and so I inherited the tall gene and missed the hair gene.
Yeah, well, really very similar. The pictures of Simon when he was a little bit younger, there were some ones of him also in the German army that I've seen, but they have been lost in various moves. But he really looked a lot like my dad when my dad was in his 30s and 40s. And I wanted to ask you, Dad, so you came to New York and let's see, wait a minute. We have the picture of you no, I guess not. Guess not. Let's see here. Now what have I done? Hey, where's Christina? Can you help me get the photos back up? Sorry about that. Anyway, you said that when you got to New York, that's when you decided you named yourself Jim or James, right?
Yeah, I think we may have discussed it briefly.
Well, you didn't really say why.
No, it just dawned on us. It's like our 2-year-old Bichon mix. My wife one day said, "Let's name him Patrick." Where did it come from? It just came out of nowhere.
But
So I think James came out of nowhere too.
But the motivation was just, you were thinking that would make you sound like more of a tough guy. Is that it, or?
I got tired of trying to pronounce Yehuda. Where did that name come from? It was like, anyway.
Okay. Trying to get the slides back. And then the other question, you were talking about, was it Ernest? That was your cousin?
Yes.
And why did he go back to Germany?
He just felt like he'd be more comfortable there.
After living in New York for how many years?
For,
Decades?
if I would guess, if their daughter is 18, 20, 30, let's say 30 years. So
This seems very unusual.
2018 minus 30 is what?
2018 minus 30 would be 1988.
So that's 88, 90 would be perhaps when he decided to
Thank you.
move back.
Okay. All right. Well, just something I was curious about. Okay, so we see some scenes from life in New York, and then this is life in Pittsburgh. So these are my grandparents. That's Siegfried and Etta, and Churchill, our sheepdog, that my grandmother always referred to as the elephant. We also had a dachshund whose name was Nietzsche. And
Well, he came with that name.
he came with a name. But my grandmother loved Nietzsche, and she tolerated the elephant. And you can see the expression on her face. Do you have to be in the picture? Okay, fine, whatever. And my grandfather was just, more likely to just roll with things. And then this is a scene at the dinner table when they lived in Far Rockaway after they moved from the Bronx to Far Rockaway.
Yeah, that's correct.
So we went to visit them. This was about 1969. That would be me looking like John Kennedy, and my younger brother Greg, and my brother Pete, and there's my mom, and there's Siegfried and Etta there. Joining it. Yeah, you're already burned. Yes, they lived on the beach, so of course we were going to go out and enjoy the sunshine. And I guess that's it. That's what we have for pictures. And I must be too close to the speaker, so I'm causing some feedback. Anyway, I'm trying to think if there were some other questions I wanted to follow up with you on, Dad. As far as your own assimilation after you came to the United States, what was it like for you? When you were a little kid, And that's probably making it a
Well,
little.
according to my mother, once I got into kindergarten, I still had some language barrier because we spoke German at home. But in time it passed. But then in college, my high school didn't offer German. I figured that would be a shoo-in. So I had to take Latin, and it was miserable. But in college, I took German and got straight A's.
And
it boosted my GPA.
And how about for your parents, for two European Jews coming to the United States? What was it like, the adjustment like for them? Did they ever talk to you about it? Maybe not right away, but later?
No, most of what I heard was skirmishes with the family. We lived in the same apartment building or tenement, whatever you want to call it. And there was a lot of inter-family strife, which is really what I heard most about otherwise. And then we moved quite a few blocks away from them to another part of the Bronx where things got better. But we still regularly visited.
And the Bronx was a
we
destination.
visited each other, but not being that close proximity made things better. I should perhaps also point out that the grandparents, being Orthodox, wouldn't even turn on a radio or a light switch, but had no issue with us taking the subway to visit them on the Sabbath. That was okay.
And the Bronx became a destination because why?
I don't know.
Is that
No, I shouldn't say that, because Martha and Bertha they immigrated earlier, so they lived there, and I guess
those were Siegfried's sisters?
two sisters. So they lived in the same building. So I guess that was convenient that we also moved into that building.
And my dad being in the Bronx, where you had both of the New York professional baseball teams, the Yankees and the Giants in those days, both played in the Bronx. My mother's going, and the Dodgers, because she was born in Brooklyn, but they didn't play in the Bronx, Mom. They played in Brooklyn.
I understand that. I just want to get in there.
Okay, all right.
I agree.
The Giants and the Yankees played in the Bronx. My dad became a big Giants fan, and you were, what, in sixth grade when Bobby Thompson hit the famous home run that they called the shot heard around the world, which everybody would agree with except people that live in Pittsburgh, because we think the Mazeroski home run was more important. But I had a chance to meet Bobby Thompson, who I think died recently, but who was one of my dad's heroes, and I had a chance to get him to autograph a baseball to my dad, to Jim. Best regards, sincerely, Bobby Thompson was the way he signed the baseball, which still occupies a prominent place in our house, and is probably one of your favorite childhood sports memories anyway?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That and the football Giants also.
I am going to open up the floor. Is that a weather warning? Okay, you might have noticed that it was raining pretty hard earlier, which is part of why we boosted the volume, so hopefully you've been able to hear most of this. Where's that coming from? Oh, okay. Oh, you missed the announcement about the cell phones. Anyway, we're safe in here, so that's the good news. All right, so I'm going to open up the floor to questions from the audience. And this gentleman right here in row 3, go ahead.
Would you characterize your family as Orthodox or Reformed?
Dad?
I would say Orthodox. We missed part of the story, a gap. So my parents stayed in the Bronx, grew up in the Bronx, mostly through college. And then the Bronx became rather ghetto-fied, and so they decided to move to Rockaway.
Which also
Well, no, not that bad. And interestingly, the only transportation out there was the Long Island Railroad, but then the New York subway system took over the Long Island Railroad. So I think it was probably after college, but when I went to dental school at Columbia, I could get on a train in Rockaway and take the train all the way up to 198th Street is where the Columbia Presbyterian Health Center was. So I did all my studying on the subway. Took about an hour and a half each day, but got plenty of studying done. Oh, I'm sorry. No. Okay, so they stayed in Rockaway. Then, of course, winters became more difficult, so they used to go to Florida over the winter, and then finally moved to Florida. This is a long answer to your question.
One reason I asked the question is that often in Orthodox family, girls were not allowed to have the same education as boys. In your family, were they?
He was an only child.
No, my mother had considered medical school. But my mother was always annoyed when you say Orthodox. She didn't like the idea of being segregated in the synagogue. So when they moved to Miami, the most convenient temple was I think, Reform or Conservative. I don't recall, but they transitioned slowly, and then as they began to travel in their later years, they didn't mind eating non-kosher products. Never pork, but had no issues with seafood. Got to like lobster and things like that. So things got a little looser over the years.
But Etta, wasn't she accepted to medical school? Didn't she?
I
think she was, and probably in this day and age would have become a doctor. I'll get to you, Roberta. Let me get to this lovely lady right here.
Yeah, I'd like to take the story back to Oberhausen. When I saw that city mentioned, I was curious because I've been there several times, and there's a wonderful, wonderful place in Oberhausen that was founded to care for children who are victims of war. And the German people in that town said, because of what we did in World War II, we must make amends. So they bring children there from all over the world, Africa, Europe, the Middle East. It started with Vietnam. And German doctors give them medical care free. They stay in hospitals free, and they receive rehabilitation. And then they go home to their own country. When I first visited there, it's up on a hill. And when I got to the top of the hill, I wanted to turn around right away and leave, because the sight of all these children, and most of them are missing limbs, legs and arms, and it's because of landmines. But I swallowed hard and stayed, and I've been back 3 or 4 times. It's called Friedensdorf, and it sort of takes us back to Oberhausen and gives some hope.
And picking up from that, Oberhausen met the same fate as Pittsburgh. The mills closed, the mines closed, and now it's developed into an entirely different city and found other ways for the people to find employment. And it was around the same time, I think, in 1970s, that all the heavy industry began to collapse.
There was a gentleman who had his hand up early, and was it you, sir, in the green back there, or oh, he left. That's too bad. All right. Yes, sir, right there.
I wanted to know why you selected dentistry, to study dentistry.
I don't know, it sort of happened. Tossing thing. I knew I wasn't going to. Chemistry didn't fascinate me, and I was lousy in math. So I discovered that new chemistry was a lot of mathematics, and so forget it. And then in college, we had a pre-med, pre-dental club, and we started talking among us and said, dentistry sounds great. Let's pursue that.
Where'd you do your undergraduate?
City College.
Okay.
The City College.
Congratulations.
That was tuition free.
That's great.
Yes, sir.
We have a question from someone who's watching online, from Allison Guggenheim.
That would be the granddaughter.
It's our granddaughter, Allison.
She asked for you to talk about when you moved to Pittsburgh, and just talk about the talk about your experience moving to Pittsburgh.
Which also could seem like a foreign country.
Well, the language was.
Yeah, sir.
It was just very attractive. Just a great place to live. And well, of course, the job opening was there. It was my subspecialty is oral medicine. I took postgraduate training after dental school for 4 years and focused in that discipline. So it's the interactions of medicine and dentistry. And so when I finished my program in Philadelphia, they brought me out for an interview, and I've never left. The other question I was anticipating was that Ernest moved back to Germany. I think people have asked, do you have no interest in going back to Germany? Well, I never was in Germany. It was in Yugoslavia.
You have any interest in going back to Belgrade?
Not really. I know it's on the new, some of the new help tours, and it's on a river cruise, so it's included in some of the river cruises. My wife keeps telling me, let's take a river cruise. I said, I'm not going on any river that borders on Germany or Austria. I don't know, for some reason, I have no desire to go back. Also, looking at the statistics, about 11,000 Jewish servicemen were killed in World War II. We always focus, of course, on the 6 million, but again, the military, those who served also had sacrifices, also made sacrifices.
Roberta, I told you I'd get back to you.
Well, thank you, but my question was preempted, so I wanted to know why you didn't like anything.
Okay.
It was
He didn't want to be an Eagles fan any longer, he didn't want to be stuck in Philly.
It was great. The environment at Pitt is very nice. The City College was very cutthroat and very competitive. And I took that attitude to Columbia, and I didn't get very far. I said that this doesn't work. Everybody who gets in gets out. There's no reason to be competitive. There were only 40, class of only 40, which was a very excellent program, and geared and fed my interest in going into teaching and research. Because we already were doing research as students. So they cultivated that more so than other dental schools where it was primarily focused on technical aspects of dentistry.
Other questions, folks? Going once, going twice, anybody? Yes.
It's not a question, but it's about, there was a gymnasia in Riga, a Hebrew gymnasia, that your mother might have gone to.
Well,
that they're from an Orthodox family, and so.
Well, no, the gymnasium, that's equivalent to what, late high school?
It's an academic.
It's an academic in lieu of high school, they call it gymnasium. Not sure what grades it encompasses.
In Greece, it encompassed 6th to 12th grade.
6th through 12th grade, gymnasia, yeah.
One thing, I'm not sure if it was answered, but you mentioned the quotas and how some Jews could get out of Europe, but exactly what was the sequence of events that enabled you to get out?
Well, it wasn't as we see in the number sheet, the immigration data. Immigration in 30s and 40s still based on the 1925 immigration law, and that wasn't changed, I don't think, until 65. But if you look at the numbers, The numbers are quite substantial. We look at Germany, Austria, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Belgium, France, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Hungary. Those numbers really increased beginning in the 30s, 33, 34, when already the Nazi Party was forming and consolidating its power. So people, I guess, just wanted to start to leave. And this includes non-Jews. This is the entire population, but many people came on, were discriminated against. So the family, when the family left in the 30s, I guess as late as 37 for Bertha and Saul, there wasn't a great deal of pressure yet until it then escalated as the discrimination became worse. So I guess everyone could get out because the immigration was less than the quota. Yeah, the quotas are listed underneath, so you can see. For many years, the immigration was well below the quota.
But just from your own personal state, do you remember anything about your mom coming or your dad coming to you and saying, you know, we're leaving, this is why? Nothing like that?
I was 2.
You were 2?
No regulations.
And as far as was there any particular thing that you know created the moment when they decided this is now's the time, we got to get out of here?
I guess the atmosphere, the climate became worse and worse. I could see what was going on around them and said it's time to get out. In fact, my mother was more insistent. My father was, he didn't quite see the threat. I think my mother was played a bigger role in getting us to leave.
How long did it take them to get out once they made that decision?
No, it'd be that long.
The question was how long did it take?
Yeah, how long did it take? Well, there was a lot of paperwork, as I point out in one of the sheets, to get a visa and to find a sponsor. I think some financial issues had to be met, financial requirements. So yeah, it was probably it may have taken months, I would think. Not as bad as today, but it certainly took quite some time.
And the first time they applied, they were accepted?
Yeah, that the quota had not yet been filled. Since we were 3 different countries, we got in under the, I don't know how filled it was at the time, but rather than having, and again, it was not a choice. Your quota, your visa was based on your country of birth, so it wasn't fudged at all. It had to be done that way.
And that's kind of a revelation for me, because I never thought about that.
Neither did I never thought of it either.
But there was my dad, who was technically a Yugoslav, and my grandmother, who was Latvian, and of course my grandfather, who was German. Gentleman right there. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much for the talk. It's noted on the sheet that you mentioned about that seemed that there was kind of anti-immigration sentiment from Americans, and 72% responded no. So I wondered what was the treatment like once your family arrived in the United States?
Well, again, New York has the largest Jewish population, so we were hardly in the minority. So the treatment was, there was no discrimination. There was discrimination, but I don't think it was as obvious or minimally obvious in New York City because of the predominance of the Jewish population. Yeah, the Warschauer home was actually a Jewish home for the aged. It was sponsored by Hebrew organizations.
That's a picture there of him in his office at the Warschauer home. So if Donald Trump had been president,
Oh.
no, we won't go
But
there.
the patterns are very similar. In fact, I think I mentioned it in here, that there was I don't know if it was actually a written policy, unwritten policy, that the immigration authorities were told to favor people from Northern Europe, Eastern and Northern Europe, and not Southern Europe. And when did we hear that? A couple of months ago. So,
History, well, that's why we're here, aren't we? Because history does repeat itself. Right, exactly. Does repeat itself. The gentleman finished my sentence for me. This lady right here, then we'll get to you, Catherine. Yes, ma'am.
This is not much of a question, rather a possible explanation. Somebody earlier asked why your parents went to Serbia, Yugoslavia, and from my experience in growing up in Germany, the choice was going somewhere not too far. It's not going to last that long.
yeah, and again, the country
And
is small.
also, you don't want to totally break, and so you go somewhere nearby, and then
Soon it'll all be over.
you can come back here.
That's great.
Something very
Oh, and-
an environment that you can adjust easier than getting big cut going to Palestine.
Exactly, travel time by train, or I guess mostly public transportation before they built all the highways, but by train it was maybe about a couple of hour train ride. It takes 7 hours to cross Pennsylvania, diagonally.
Catherine?
I just had a sort of an addition to the gentleman at the back's question about whether you experienced any discrimination, because my mother, I grew up in England, and I remember my mother visiting her sister in America and being shocked. I don't know where she saw this, but she saw sort of signs on storefronts saying things like "No Jews," and this was as soon after the war as she could come and visit her sister who was already living there.
In the U.S.
Yeah.
But we're in the U.S., not
Well,
New
then
York.
I'm not sure exactly
Yeah.
where she saw these.
Yeah, I doubt if it was New York.
You'd go out of business.
But that she I remember her saying when she came home, she was shocked to see that.
Well, they had it at country clubs.
Yeah.
Well,
And maybe that's the kind of place she saw it. Yeah.
there's still plenty.
So anyway, I just wanted to sort of follow up on your question.
Well, let's see, I
But
started
it was there, those
58.
feelings of that you talk about in the thing about people that want.
My dental school class, I said, was 40. There were about 20, mostly Italian, and the other half were Jewish. So,
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question. You were born in Yugoslavia.
yes.
So did you have the Yugoslav nationality when you were born there?
I suppose.
Well, he was.
Well, how did we get from-
He immigrated as, he was technically listed as a Yugoslav
Yeah.
citizen.
Yeah, and again, immigration between European countries was the same thing. I suppose there were quotas and rules and restrictions, and I think all the documents at the time also were your birth certificate, all that were marked Jewish, that you were identified.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Anti-Semitism did not begin with the Nazis.
Oh, of course
My
not.
father grew up in Austria-Hungary. His family was forced to leave because of the Russians coming in to kill Jews.
Well, the pattern is obvious. The purges in Russia under Stalin, and that began before the Nazis and after.
And
After the war, and go back to the Inquisition.
Anybody else with a question? Well, I want to thank our audience for your kind attention, and We will be around for a little while. There are snacks which you can help yourselves to, and beverages. We've been hearing the cell phones go off, which means that there is a flash flood warning apparently. So please be careful driving home. Stay out of the bathtub area and anywhere that
Washington Boulevard.
and Washington Boulevard, and any area that you know that happens to flood. Don't walk away, Dad. I would like to thank my dad, Dr. Guggenheimer. And my mom, do you want to take, Mom, stand up and take a bow. Yeah. My mom hurt her knee last night, she can't stand up, so I'm standing for her. Again, I'm Paul Guggenheimer. Thank you to the Holocaust Center for inviting us. Again, thank you for your attendance and your rapt attention. And thank you, Lauren Barron's father. Give yourselves a round of applause.
I just want to reiterate that we have snacks still. It's still raining really hard. If you would like to hang around and have something to eat, please do. I hope that the rain will slow down soon. So please feel free to stay for a while. And thank you for coming.